Sometimes the life you thought was your reward turns out to be your greatest test. Abandoned by her cheating millionaire husband, a woman finds true love. Now he regrets everything. Sit back and prepare to be drawn into a story of heartbreak, resilience, and the transformative power of true love. Imagine a young woman, deeply loyal and full of dreams, only to be cruelly abandoned by the man who had vowed her the world. He was a millionaire playboy who built his fortune on charm and cunning, leaving her devastated and alone. Yet from the wreckage of betrayal, she would rise, discovering in another man the unwavering love she had thought lost forever. And when her unfaithful husband realizes what he's thrown away, all he can do is watch, helpless and riddled with remorse. He never imagined this would happen. Juliana McCrae had never been one to dream beyond her reach. Raised in a humble neighborhood outside Portland, Oregon, she always pictured a life of simple happiness, a cozy home, a close-knit family, and a sense of belonging. But fate had other intentions. In her mid-20s, everything changed. She met the smooth-talking, magnetic Adrian Wolfe at a charity benefit. Adrian was already a self-made millionaire by 30, renowned for his flair and self-assurance. He was one of the evening's key sponsors, confidently moving through the crowd in a sharply tailored suit, a dazzling Audemars Piguet watch gleaming on his wrist, charming everyone he encountered. The night he noticed her felt like a scene from a movie. Beneath the glittering chandeliers, with the notes of a live quartet filling the air, Adrian offered Juliana a glass of champagne. He introduced himself with a smile that made her knees go weak. From the very beginning, every move he made radiated extravagance. Juliana felt like she had stepped into her own Cinderella story. For a woman who had never dared to hope for luxury or glamour, every moment with Adrian felt like walking through a dream she wasn't sure she deserved. She'd spent so many years believing in humble, quiet joy, yet suddenly, she was the center of a dazzling whirlwind, her name on guest lists, her photo in society columns. The disbelief lingered in her heart, even as she smiled beside him, wondering if this was real and terrified it might slip away. Convinced she had met her prince, Juliana was swept into a whirlwind of romance. Candlelit dinners at Michelin-star restaurants, spontaneous weekend getaways aboard his private jet, and more roses than her tiny rental could hold. Before long, the two were engaged. Life felt like a dream speeding forward. Juliana dared to believe in happily ever after. Before Adrian, she had been content working at a community outreach center in a small Portland office, living modestly but with purpose. After the wedding, her world shifted dramatically. It was like being pulled onto a glittering stage with blinding lights and endless demands. Adrian purchased a luxury condo in downtown Los Angeles with sweeping views of the skyline. The walls were adorned with priceless art, from Degas sketches to an original Murano glass piece that sparkled under the gallery-style lighting. She tried to keep up, learning the names of fashion designers she'd never heard of, memorizing wine lists, mastering the etiquette of cocktail parties and art auctions. Yet no matter how polished she appeared, she often felt like a guest in someone else's life. There were moments she stared at herself in the mirror before an event, dressed to perfection, and barely recognized the woman staring back. At first, Juliana was swept up in the glamour. She attended exclusive galas in designer gowns worth more than her former annual salary. She sipped handcrafted lattes in boutique cafes along Rodeo Drive, surrounded by people who talked about couture, yacht renovations, and tropical estates. Adrian introduced her to his circle of powerful friends, CEOs, venture capitalists, even an entertainment mogul who casually dropped A-list names in every sentence. But beneath the polish, Juliana struggled to find her place. At charity events, she wasn't a volunteer anymore. She was arm candy, expected to smile and pose for photos. The surface of her new life shimmered with elegance, but something unsettled her. Adrian was rarely around. Business always came first, pushing aside dinners, conversations, and quiet moments at home. She still held on, convinced that every marriage had its rough edges. The first real argument surfaced just a month after the honeymoon. Juliana had hoped to visit her aging parents in Portland, but Adrian insisted she accompany him on a weekend business trip to Napa Valley. She tried to reason with him, explaining her father's worsening health, but Adrian refused to budge. "I'm finalizing a massive deal," he said curtly. I need you there." That minor clash revealed something deeper. Adrian was used to having things his way. Juliana could sense it in the clipped tone of his voice, the subtle irritation in his eyes anytime she expressed a different viewpoint. His dismissive attitude toward her concerns cut her more than she let on. Still, she made excuses. "He's just under pressure," she told herself. "He's driven. This is what success demands." But somewhere beneath her logical justifications, an uneasy feeling had begun to bloom. A quiet voice, barely a whisper, started questioning whether this dynamic was love or control. She didn't want to believe it. Not yet. Not when the memory of their wedding vows still lingered in her mind like soft echoes. "I have to stand by him if I want this marriage to work." But the frustration lingered, humming beneath the surface like static in the air. Soon, Juliana began to notice more subtle shifts. The late-night calls taken in hushed tones. The spontaneous business trips that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The way he shielded his phone from her view. Deep down, she sensed that something wasn't right. But still, she clung to the hope that it was all in her head. After all, she loved him. And love, she had always believed, meant patience. It meant believing in your partner, even when doubts crept in like shadows under the door. She reminded herself that all marriages had seasons, that maybe this was just one of them. The moment that shattered her illusions arrived on an overcast Tuesday morning. Adrian was away on yet another urgent business trip, and Juliana, feeling unsettled and aimless, decided to tidy up the condo. She wandered into his home office, a space he usually asked her not to enter. She was looking for an important receipt he had left behind when, in a bottom drawer rarely touched, she discovered a folder. It was stuffed with photographs. Her hands trembling, she flipped through image after image of Adrian with another woman, tall, raven-haired, always draped in luxurious designer outfits. They were laughing, embracing, and kissing in front of iconic landmarks like the Sydney Opera House and the Santorini Cliffs. Each image struck her like a blow to the chest. Her lungs constricted. It felt like the air had been ripped from the room. The woman beside Adrian wasn't just a fling. These photos told a story, a narrative of intimacy and comfort that wasn't hers. Juliana's entire body went cold, a hollow ache swelling in her chest. The world she thought she knew began to dissolve, frame by frame. The walls of her carefully built world began to close in, squeezing her breath away with every revelation. Her heart pounded violently as she collapsed into the leather chair, tears blurring her vision, the photos slipping from her hands in a blur of color and betrayal. There was no reasonable excuse, no interpretation that could soften the blow. The proof was damning, undeniable. She felt dizzy, caught between the desperate pull of denial and the searing sting of betrayal. But even as the pain threatened to crush her, something within her stirred. A calm, defiant strength. This would not destroy her. She needed answers. Juliana paced the sleek floors of the condo, her stomach roiling with anxiety. She debated whether to call Adrian right then and there, or wait until he returned and confront him face to face. Anger warred with heartbreak inside her chest. She could still smell his cologne on the couch cushions, a lingering trace of the life they had built together, now tainted by deception. When Adrian finally returned later that evening, Juliana stood in the foyer. The damning folder pressed tightly against her chest. The look in her eyes stopped him in his tracks. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, frozen in the silence of broken trust. Then her voice, trembling but firm, pierced the air. "Who is she, Adrian?" she demanded, holding the folder up so he could see. His usually confident composure cracked. Panic flickered across his face, followed by a wave of irritation. He stammered, scrambling for excuses. "It's not what it looks like. Those are old photos, from before I even met you." His voice, once so smooth and commanding, now faltered, uncertain and exposed. Juliana saw the flicker of guilt flash across his face before he could hide it behind practiced charm. For years, she had been trained by his reactions to doubt herself, to soften conflict. But tonight, something had shifted. She stood rooted. But Juliana wasn't buying it. Driven by desperation, Adrian reached for her, tried to soothe her with soft words and a gentle hand on her arm. But she pulled away. Nothing he said could erase the images now etched into her mind. In that moment, Juliana felt her love for him tremble on the edge of collapse. The weight of years pressed against her chest, birthdays spent alone, conversations half-finished, affection that had slowly grown cold. And now, with this undeniable truth in her hands, the illusion she had clung to shattered into silence. She wouldn't settle for a marriage built on lies. Over the following days, Adrian launched a relentless campaign to keep her from walking away. He smothered her confusion with a haze of half-truths and manipulation. He claimed the mysterious woman with the dark hair was simply a client, someone he had charmed to secure a deal. It wasn't emotional, he insisted, just business. He swore the photographs were taken during professional events he had no choice but to attend. But Juliana sensed he was rewriting history to salvage his image, not to win back her trust. The sharp pain of betrayal began to dull into something heavier, an ache she carried everywhere. She would wake up at night with the images still vivid behind her eyes, the echo of his voice trying to explain what couldn't be justified. Part of her wanted to believe, wanted so badly to erase the questions, rewind to a time when doubt hadn't yet crept into their home. But truth has a way of lingering, louder in silence than in sound. She heard his words, but none of them landed. Still she wavered. Could she really abandon a life that had offered her so much? Could she give up the dream she once believed in so fiercely? She tried to cling to the possibility maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe she had overreacted. The whispered phone calls, the surprise business trips, the strange messages he quickly deleted. Juliana's mind spun, connecting the dots she had tried so hard to ignore. Days dragged on in a state of emotional limbo. She was afraid of what the future held, yet unable to fully accept that the man she had given her heart to could deceive her so deeply. Every choice felt loaded: stay and risk more pain, or leave and risk regret. Her heart swung between defiance and disbelief, desperate to find footing. She hadn't realized how much of herself she had lost until she tried to remember who she was before him. Just as she began entertaining the idea of forgiveness, fate struck with cruel clarity. One evening, sitting alone in the condo's spacious living room, flipping through TV channels, a breaking news alert interrupted the broadcast. There he was. Paparazzi photos of Adrian at a luxury resort in the Maldives filled the screen, his arm wrapped tightly around the same raven-haired woman from the photographs. The timestamp read just 2 days ago, the same weekend he had claimed to be at a men-only business retreat. Juliana's eyes burned as tears welled up. Her entire body stiffened with rage. This was no longer a matter of confusion. Juliana had irrefutable proof that Adrian had never truly ended things with his mistress. His so-called urgent business trips were nothing more than elaborate escapes for romantic rendezvous. It was both degrading and heartbreaking to realize how little he valued their marriage. Fueled by righteous fury, Juliana stormed into the bedroom. She yanked open drawers and stuffed clothes into a suitcase, her hands trembling and breath ragged. By the time Adrian returned home, the news segment had already gone viral across every major social media platform. Juliana stood at the door, coat on, her bag in hand. Her voice trembled, but her stance was firm. "You've lied to me for the last time, Adrian. I'm done." That night, she walked out of the high-rise condo, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every other sound. She found temporary refuge in the guest bedroom of her old friend Sierra's apartment. It was a far cry from the luxury she had grown used to, but it offered a quiet corner of safety. Sierra tried her best to comfort her, with hot tea, soft blankets, and late-night conversations, but nothing could calm the storm of humiliation and heartbreak raging inside Juliana. Within days, headlines exploded. The tabloids and gossip sites were relentless. Tech tycoon's secret double life exposed. Adrian Wolf's cheating scandal shocks LA's elite. Juliana felt a deep humiliation, but underneath it something unexpected stirred: power. The truth was out. The world finally saw what he had done. And then the final insult arrived. Juliana received official notice of a lawsuit. Adrian was filing for annulment, claiming she had misrepresented herself and wasn't fit to be his wife. The claims were absurd, fabrications meant to discredit her and cut her off financially. It was a ruthless legal tactic designed to crush her and protect his wealth. For Juliana, it was a brutal awakening. The man she had once worshipped wasn't just a liar. He was perfectly willing to destroy her to save himself. She braced herself for the legal war that lay ahead. She wouldn't let him write her out of the story. As the legal battle escalated, Juliana realized that if she clung to her bitterness, it would consume her. With Sierra's help, she connected with a small but dedicated law firm. The attorneys listened to her story with empathy and promised to help her fight for what she was owed. But Juliana needed more than justice. She needed healing. With the modest savings she had secretly kept during the marriage, she began volunteering part-time at a community shelter. Helping serve meals, offering blankets, listening to stories, it grounded her. The people there reminded her of who she was before Adrian had swept in and redefined her life with luxury and illusion. One sunny afternoon, Juliana sat outside a quaint little cafe tucked between a bookstore and a bike shop. Nothing like the upscale Starbucks on Rodeo Drive. She used to visit places like this often. As Juliana gazed out at the busy street, it hit her. Her suffering hadn't just broken her down, it had also led her back to her own strength. Every day without Adrian was another step away from the glossy lie she had once lived, and one step closer to the woman she truly was. The heartbreak hadn't faded entirely, but at least she no longer felt like a prisoner in a gilded cage. Still, there were moments like this one, when a quiet ache surfaced, when the world moved forward and she wasn't sure if she was truly a part of it again. She wondered if people saw her strength or only saw the woman who had been betrayed so publicly. There were nights she doubted her own worth, stripped of glamour, of a last name tied to wealth. Who was she now? Those questions lingered, unanswered but honest. Amid the legal storm surrounding her, Juliana received an unexpected email from someone she barely remembered. Cassidy Monroe, a well-known socialite she had once met at one of Adrian's ostentatious charity galas. Cassidy had always struck Juliana as dramatic and addicted to drama, more flash than substance. So when the email popped up, Juliana was cautious, but the message's tone surprised her. Cassidy wrote with raw honesty, revealing that she had once been involved with Adrian before Juliana had entered the picture. She described his manipulative charm, the emotional games, and the way he discarded people once they no longer served his ambitions. Though their relationship hadn't made headlines, Cassidy claimed she had kept a folder, documents that exposed Adrian's questionable business practices and a troubling pattern of psychological control. "I'm tired of watching him destroy women," Cassidy wrote. "He tried to shut me up, but I won't stay silent anymore." Juliana reread the message several times. She wanted to trust it, but fear crept in. What if it was a trap? A ploy? The thought of being blindsided again made her stomach twist. But deeper than the fear was a flicker of something else, a fragile hope that maybe someone out there truly understood. Still skeptical, Juliana agreed to meet her at a quiet, out-of-the-way diner on the edge of the city. Over chipped mugs of coffee and worn vinyl seats, Cassidy slid a flash drive across the table. "It's all here," she said softly, her voice laced with nerves. Juliana plugged the drive into her laptop later that evening. Her heart thudded as she scrolled through dozens of files, screenshots of texts, internal emails, bank records. It wasn't just personal betrayal. Adrian had used insider information to inflate deals and manipulate contracts. There were messages that showed how he had targeted women for clout, access, or emotional leverage. Juliana's pulse surged. For the first time since this nightmare began, she didn't feel alone. Her breath caught in her throat, not from panic, but from the realization that her pain wasn't isolated. Others had lived it too, and somehow that made it more real and more bearable. She had someone who understood, and more importantly, she had evidence. She forwarded the files to her legal team immediately. The new information painted a damning portrait, not only of Adrian's infidelity, but of deliberate fraud and calculated emotional exploitation. Her attorneys moved quickly. Armed with concrete proof, they challenged Adrian's annulment filing and pursued financial and emotional compensation. Suddenly they had leverage. Adrian's powerful lawyers retaliated fast. They issued threats, sent intimidating legal briefs, and tried to pressure Juliana into settling. But she didn't budge. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was standing up for every woman Adrian had manipulated. Word of the explosive document spread quickly. By morning, the media had picked up the scent. He had gone from a high-flying tech entrepreneur to a man under public scrutiny, his name now synonymous with scandal. In public, Juliana remained composed during interviews, refusing to give gossip outlets the emotional breakdown they craved. In private, she prayed for the strength to see the lawsuit through to the end. The world was finally seeing Adrian Wolfe for who he really was, and for once, Juliana no longer felt like a silenced casualty in someone else's narrative. But the process wore her down. Amid endless court dates, thick binders of evidence, and the relentless drone of media speculation, Juliana teetered on the edge of emotional burnout. Every day felt like a battle to protect her dignity, her truth. Still, she kept going, driven by the unshakable belief that she wouldn't let Adrian or anyone else reduce her to just another sad chapter in his controversial rise and fall. There were mornings when she could barely summon the energy to get dressed, nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the fear that even if she won the case, something inside her had already been lost. But she pushed forward, clinging to the faint flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, life had more in store for her than survival. One overcast morning, as she entered the law firm for a strategy meeting, Juliana accidentally bumped into a tall, soft-spoken man, juggling an unwieldy set of architectural blueprints. His papers flew everywhere. Flustered, Juliana immediately bent down to help him gather the scattered pages. He gave her a quiet, appreciative smile and introduced himself as Daniel Whitaker, an architect who had recently joined the firm as a consultant on a property division case. There was something disarmingly warm about Daniel. His demeanor, his voice, calm and sincere, was a stark contrast to Adrian's calculated confidence. They made small talk, nothing personal, but the interaction left Juliana with a strange sense of ease. It was such a small moment, so ordinary, but in a life that had become dominated by legal strategy and emotional exhaustion, the simplicity of it felt like a breath of fresh air. For a brief second, she felt seen, not as someone involved in a scandal, but as a woman carrying far more than anyone knew. It had been a long time since she'd shared a moment that wasn't colored by gossip, pity, or legal tension. Over the next few weeks, she saw Daniel now and then at the office. Sometimes just a nod in passing. Other times they exchanged a few words about the stress of court logistics or late meetings. Nothing deep, but every time they spoke, Juliana left feeling unexpectedly lighter. He had a way of smiling at her like she wasn't broken, like she wasn't complicated or difficult or the woman in that headline. It wasn't flirtation, it was understanding. And that made it even more powerful. One late afternoon, after a particularly grueling court hearing, Juliana sat alone in the firm's coffee nook, staring into a cup of herbal tea. She didn't even realize how lost she looked until Daniel approached her table. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his tone gentle but laced with genuine concern. She nodded. For someone usually so guarded, Juliana found herself sharing more than she expected. She gave him the short version of her situation. The betrayal, the media frenzy, the exhausting court fight. Daniel listened carefully, never interrupting, never rushing her. There was a moment mid-conversation when her voice cracked, and she caught her breath, bracing for judgment. But it never came. Just a patient silence, and a soft nod that said, "You don't need to explain more than you want to." He acknowledged that he had heard whispers around the office, but said he'd rather hear it from her directly. He didn't ask invasive questions or offer hollow advice. He simply let her talk. And by the time she stopped, Juliana felt a quiet release, as though some of the weight on her chest had finally lifted. There was something grounding about his presence. In his patient gaze, she recognized someone who didn't see her as a victim or a headline, but as a person. A week later, Daniel invited her to get out of the building for a bit and grab lunch. They walked to a small sandwich shop a few blocks away, an unassuming mom-and-pop place that reminded Juliana of the little spots she used to love back in Portland. They each ordered simple turkey sandwiches. She began to know the quiet architect more deeply. Daniel opened up about his modest roots in a small town in Ohio, how he had lost his father at a young age and had worked 2 jobs through college just to become an architect. He specialized in sustainable, community-focused projects, revitalizing shelters, designing affordable housing, building spaces that mattered. His passion for social impact brought a quiet fire to his otherwise reserved personality. Juliana found herself letting down her guard even more. Amid the emotional chaos of her life, Daniel became an unexpected anchor, steady, thoughtful, and genuinely kind. And yet, even as comfort grew between them, a whisper of doubt lingered in Juliana's chest. Was it too soon to feel this seen, this understood? Part of her feared that she was projecting hope onto someone kind, mistaking gentleness for permanence. She wanted to trust what was unfolding, but trust, now, came with caution. Their mutual commitment to helping vulnerable communities created a natural connection. Daniel admitted he'd always been wary of working with elite clients who only cared about profits, but the law firm had assured him he could choose projects that aligned with his values. Both of them were tired of shallow connections. Juliana had lived through the illusion of glamour and knew how hollow it could be. Daniel craved sincerity, something real. Over that simple lunch, they found solace in each other's stories, discovering that sometimes strangers made the most loyal allies. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere between Juliana and Adrian was tense and charged. Adrian's legal team painted her as a manipulative gold digger, obsessed with his money. They carefully curated moments from her old social media, photos of high society galas, designer dresses, luxury vacations, trying to depict her as someone complicit in his lavish world. But Juliana's lawyers struck back with the evidence Cassidy had provided, a trove of emails detailing Adrian's infidelities, shady business deals, and even his attempts to silence witnesses. The judge took notice. Real financial records, complete with transactions from major institutions like JP Chase, gave their case undeniable weight. Gossip blogs and tabloids had a field day with every update. Paparazzi camped outside the courthouse, desperate for a soundbite. Juliana, however, kept her composure. She never fed the frenzy, never gave them the scandalous headline they were after. She stayed focused on the truth, on cutting the final ties to Adrian and the damage he had caused. But behind closed doors, there were moments when she wondered if the world would always see her as someone associated with scandal. Would Daniel still look at her the same if she weren't in the middle of headlines? If she were just herself, stripped of the noise? The question clawed at her silently. Even as the legal firestorm raged on, something in her personal life quietly started to bloom. In the quiet moments with Daniel, over lunch, during walks, or in chance meetings at the law office, Juliana began to feel like herself again. One evening, as she sat in the firm's conference room, eyes heavy from a full day of paperwork, Daniel appeared in the doorway. He tapped lightly against the frame, offering a soft smile. "You look like you could use a break," he said, his voice warm with concern. Juliana couldn't help but smile. She agreed. They stepped out for a quick walk. The city lights glimmered all around them, casting golden halos on the pavement. And for the first time in a long while, Juliana realized she was seeing Los Angeles differently, not as the city where her life fell apart, but as a place where it might begin again. The next chapter of her life might look different. Daniel's voice broke the quiet as they strolled past a row of small boutiques glowing under warm storefront lights. "You know," he said, his tone more hesitant than usual, "I've been thinking about you. A lot. Would you maybe want to get dinner sometime? Nothing legal related, just to talk. Or not. Whatever feels right." Juliana stopped mid-step, her heart pounding. Since Adrian, the thought of opening herself to something romantic had never even crossed her mind, but something about Daniel felt safe, genuine, hopeful. So she said yes. It wasn't a grand yes, just a quiet one, but it was enough to stir something in her chest, something that felt like freedom. Daniel picked a small Italian restaurant tucked into a quiet Westwood side street. From the moment they walked in, the place felt like a sanctuary. Dim lighting, the aroma of garlic and basil, soft music humming in the background. Juliana's nerves fluttered, not from anxiety, but from possibility. This wasn't a life of luxury and press coverage. This was something simple, real. They didn't talk about the trial, or Adrian, or the latest headlines. Instead, they spoke of childhood memories, books they loved, and the moments in life that reminded them people still had goodness in them. It was the most honest conversation Juliana had had in months. Halfway through the meal, an older man emerged from the kitchen and clapped Daniel on the back. Bruno, the restaurant's owner. It turned out Daniel had helped Bruno's cousin restore a historic neighborhood building after an earthquake, donating his time and design expertise. Juliana watched as Bruno thanked him with genuine affection, and something shifted in her heart. Daniel wasn't flashy. He wasn't trying to impress her. He simply did good things because they mattered to him. No manipulation, no hidden motives, just kindness. By the time the check arrived, Juliana felt something loosen inside her, like a knot that had been clenched too tight for too long. There was something real between them, and she was ready to see where it led. But just as she started to believe she could move on, Adrian struck back with one final, desperate blow. His lawyers painted her as promiscuous and deceitful. They paraded a string of so-called witnesses, men who had clearly been coached, if not outright paid, to tarnish her reputation. One man claimed Juliana had once tried to seduce him at a rooftop party, a complete fabrication that made her skin crawl. The courtroom erupted. Juliana's legal team objected fiercely, questioning the timing, motive, and consistency of every witness. But the damage had already leaked into public view. Tabloid headlines screamed, "Vindictive wife or misunderstood victim?" The Adrian Wolf scandal explodes again. Overnight, she became a target once more. People who had never met her dissected her life in comment threads and anonymous forums. They debated her character, judged her choices, weaponized her pain for their entertainment. And Juliana, once again, had to fight just to be believed. She felt more cornered than ever, desperate for the truth to prevail. That's when Daniel stepped in, proving his loyalty in a way that moved Juliana deeply. Quietly, without fanfare, he reached out to a network of fellow architects, professionals with experience in digital forensics and investigative documentation. Many had backgrounds in civic planning and data verification. Within days, they volunteered their time to comb through the so-called evidence Adrian's legal team had submitted. It didn't take long for them to find the cracks. Doctored timestamps, altered call logs, suspicious transfers to witnesses. Juliana's legal team jumped at the findings, compiling a comprehensive report that laid bare the entirety of Adrian's smear campaign. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Where once the media had leaned into the scandal, headlines now focused on the manipulation. Journalists dissected the forged evidence. Public sympathy swung back toward Juliana, not just as a betrayed woman, but as someone who had been maliciously targeted. More than relief, Juliana felt a surge of gratitude for Daniel and for the quiet community he had built around her. The magnitude of what he had done hit her in waves. While she had been bracing for war, Daniel had been gathering allies, not to fight for her image, but for the truth. He didn't just believe in her. He believed in justice, and that distinction meant everything. Where Adrian had once wielded unchecked power, Juliana now saw that integrity and real support carried a deeper strength. It wasn't about flash or headlines. It was about people who showed up without needing credit. People like Daniel, who fought not with noise, but with quiet courage. As the court case moved toward its conclusion, her relationship with Daniel blossomed just as steadily. Dinner dates became regular. Their conversations, once light, evolved into honest exchanges about their pasts, their fears, their hopes. Every brutal courtroom day ended with a moment of peace in Daniel's presence. A walk, a shared meal, a long hug that reminded her she wasn't facing this alone. Some nights she didn't even need to speak. She would rest her head on his shoulder, the weight of the trial melting away as his arm gently wrapped around her. There was safety in his stillness, and in that stillness, she found strength. Juliana often questioned whether she was rushing things. Her divorce wasn't even finalized, and the emotional wounds were still fresh. But every time she looked into Daniel's calm, unguarded gaze, the doubt faded. What they had wasn't about escaping the past. It was about building something new. She didn't feel like she was running anymore. She was finally standing still, rooted in something real. One evening, Daniel led her to a rooftop garden atop a historic building he had helped restore. String lights glowed softly above them, and vines wrapped around iron trellises. It felt like something out of a dream. There, beneath the stars, Juliana found herself sharing old memories. Her dad steadying her on a bike, her mom humming in the kitchen while baking pie. She realized she hadn't allowed herself to revisit joy in a long time. With Daniel, she wasn't just imagining a different future. She was rediscovering who she had been before the hurt, and that healing mattered most of all. The final day of the trial came wrapped in nerves and expectation. Juliana wore a tailored navy suit, simple, strong, a quiet statement of her resolve. From the gallery, Daniel gave her a small, steady smile, a silent vow of support. In the courtroom, the judge methodically summarized the case. He highlighted Adrian's conflicting statements, the overwhelming evidence of infidelity, and the underhanded efforts to slander Juliana's character. He acknowledged the false witnesses and praised Juliana's legal team for exposing the deception. Adrian's attorneys attempted a few last-minute maneuvers, but it was clear they had already lost. When the judge finally delivered his ruling, the courtroom fell into hushed silence. Juliana was granted a full divorce, along with a fair division of marital assets. Adrian was ordered to pay a substantial settlement for emotional distress and reputational harm. The judge didn't hold back. He called out Adrian's fraudulent actions directly and warned that further investigation into his business practices could be on the horizon. A thick silence blanketed the room. Adrian's face contorted in fury, but for once he said nothing. Juliana exhaled deeply, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. It was finally over. The chain that had bound her to him, emotionally, legally, psychologically, had been severed. The verdict marked more than legal closure. It brought a strange blend of exhaustion and renewed purpose. Juliana moved out of Sierra's spare room and into a cozy studio in Silver Lake. It wasn't flashy, but it was hers, filled with soft light, secondhand furniture, and the freedom to just be. It was a place she could shape with her own style, her own laughter, and no one else's expectations. Her attorneys encouraged her to take time off, to travel, reset, recharge. But Juliana wanted something else. She wanted purpose. She reached out to the nonprofit where she had once volunteered. They welcomed her back without hesitation. The organization was launching a new program focused on supporting women escaping toxic or abusive relationships, a cause that resonated deeply with her. Eager to channel her experience into something good, Juliana accepted a part-time role coordinating community outreach. And in her off hours, she continued seeing Daniel. They visited galleries, explored bookstores tucked between buildings, wandered through Griffith Park at dusk. Occasionally, paparazzi still lingered at a distance, cameras ready to catch another headline. But the photos told a different story now. A woman rebuilding, and a man standing quietly beside her. Over time, even the media moved on. The noise faded. Life, wonderfully, became ordinary again. Of course, the past didn't vanish entirely. Every now and then, Juliana would catch a glimpse of Adrian on social media, posing on yachts, attending launch parties in Dubai or Mykonos, wrapped in the arms of some new model. The images stirred complicated feelings, anger, pity, and sometimes still a sting of hurt. Late one night, Juliana stood barefoot on her tiny balcony, gazing out at the LA skyline. She remembered those early days in Adrian's penthouse. The awe she'd felt looking out at the city's lights, convinced that success and status equaled happiness. It felt surreal now. She had once clung so tightly to that illusion, so desperate to believe in the life he had promised. But she also saw how far she had come. And if nothing else, she was grateful for what the pain had taught her. Adrian's betrayal forced her to learn what self-worth truly meant. She no longer measured her happiness in luxury or appearances. She craved depth, honesty, connection over convenience. Daniel represented that. He didn't shower her with grand gestures, but his steady presence, his quiet decency, meant more than any diamond or designer label ever could. The shadows of the past hadn't disappeared, but now, Juliana could face them without fear. She was no longer defined by Adrian's actions. Months later, while running an outreach errand for the nonprofit, Juliana attended a charity gala, coincidentally hosted by the philanthropic division of the Walt Disney Company. She was there to represent her organization and pitch for grants to support survivors of domestic abuse. Dressed in a simple black dress, Juliana moved through the ballroom with a quiet confidence she hadn't felt in years. Halfway through the evening, she spotted a familiar figure near the champagne fountain. Adrian. He stood surrounded by a group of donors, his voice animated, posture flawless. Her pulse quickened. She fought the reflex to retreat, reminding herself she belonged here. Eventually, their eyes met. Adrian's expression shifted, surprise, then something else. something closer to regret. He murmured something to the group and broke away, walking toward her. Juliana's heart pounded, not from affection, but from the charged tension of confronting a ghost she thought she'd buried. He stopped in front of her, searching for words. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said softly, "Juliana, can we talk?" Every instinct inside her told her to be wary. But she also knew who she was now, stronger, wiser, no longer the woman he had walked over. She agreed, but on her terms. They moved to a quiet corner of the ballroom, the music fading into background ambience. Adrian looked different, still polished but worn at the edges. His eyes, once sharp with ambition, seemed weighed down. Juliana stood tall, chin raised, her gaze steady and unflinching. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," Adrian said, his voice rough around the edges. "I messed up, badly." He admitted that his businesses had taken a hit post-divorce. Investors pulled out, legal inquiries escalated. Several deals had collapsed. His personal life, he said, was hollow, built on image, not substance. He confessed that he thought he could walk away unscathed, but he had learned otherwise. Juliana listened, silent. She felt no triumph in his downfall, only detachment. He didn't feel like a part of her anymore, just someone she used to know. After a pause, she spoke. "I appreciate the apology, Adrian, I really do. But I've moved on. I hope you find peace and learn from it." Her words were clear, calm, and without bitterness. Adrian nodded slowly, regret clouding his expression. If he had hoped to spark something, rekindle even a flicker, her poise left no doubt. That door had long since closed. As Juliana turned and walked away, she felt something unshackle inside her. She had spent too many nights tangled in betrayal and pain. Now she was free. Now, hearing Adrian's voice laced with regret, Juliana realized something powerful. She didn't want revenge. The best form of closure was living a life untouched by the toxicity he once represented. She had discovered a love built on truth and shared values with Daniel. She had found purpose again through her work. Later that night, Daniel arrived at the gala to pick her up. He had insisted. His hand slid naturally into hers, grounding her, reminding her she wasn't facing anything alone anymore. When Juliana mentioned her unexpected conversation with Adrian, Daniel's brow furrowed in concern, but she gave him a soft smile. "I'm okay," she said. "Really, I am." Still, as she said the words, a quiet flicker of doubt stirred in her. Not because she didn't mean them, but because part of her feared that healing might always feel incomplete, that there might always be traces of the old wounds waiting to resurface when least expected. And this time, she meant it. Not as a mask, not as a rehearsed line, but as something earned, fought for. She could feel the difference. The strength wasn't a shield anymore. It was a quiet truth she carried within. They left together, hailing a cab under the glittering city lights. As the taxi weaved through the streets, Juliana mentally retraced the night's events. In one brief conversation, she had faced her darkest chapters and walked away unshaken. More than that, she felt validated. She deserved this new life, this peace. Yet even in that peace, there were moments she questioned whether Daniel would still choose her if she were no longer tethered to this story. Would he love her when there was no battle left to fight? No storm left to weather? The thought unnerved her, but then she looked at him, calm, consistent, quietly present. And the fear softened. He had never needed her to be broken to care. For so long, she had measured herself by the chaos around her, by the eyes watching, the rumors whispered, the headlines screaming her pain. But now, there was no audience, no performance, just a woman finally letting go. And with that realization, she closed the chapter on Adrian Wolfe for good. What followed was a gentle rhythm, one that no longer carried the weight of betrayal. She balanced her responsibilities at the nonprofit with quiet nights spent with Daniel, cooking dinner together, dancing to vinyl jazz records, or strolling hand in hand through Echo Park. Each day felt like progress, a steady departure from the chaos that once defined her world. At work, Juliana poured herself into growth. She expanded outreach efforts, launched new programs in partnership with local shelters, and led workshops on emotional resilience and financial independence. She wanted to show other women what she had learned. Leaving wasn't the end of a story. It could be the beginning of the best one. Her transformation became a quiet testament to what was possible. Meanwhile, Daniel thrived too. His design work took on new meaning. Sometimes Juliana would accompany him to project sites, watching in admiration as he balanced form and function, beauty and purpose. He designed buildings that didn't just house people, they uplifted them. Their shared commitment to doing good created a foundation deeper than either had known before. They weren't just rebuilding their individual lives, they were creating something together, brick by brick, intention by intention. In quiet moments, Juliana would be overcome with gratitude. She had endured heartbreak, scandal, and shame. And yet, she had arrived in a life that was real, grounded in love, and richer than she could have imagined. On one crisp autumn afternoon, as the city blushed with the reds and golds of the changing season, Juliana walked through a quiet park hand in hand with Daniel. The breeze carried a chill, but the warmth of his palms steadied her. They made their way to a secluded pond surrounded by tall oak trees, their leaves dancing to the rhythm of the wind. Everything felt still. She could hear the faint crunch of leaves beneath her boots, mingled with the distant sound of a couple laughing as they fed ducks across the pond. "I used to sit here when I was drafting a design for a community housing project," Daniel said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "Something about this view always helped me find clarity." Juliana smiled and took a seat on a weathered bench, her gaze settling on the still water, reflecting the brilliant tapestry of autumn colors. A gentle calm washed over her, as if the world had paused to let her breathe in the serenity. It felt like the first deep breath she had taken in years, the kind that reached places long clenched by stress and sorrow, the kind that made space for stillness, for grace, for the possibility of something new. The fiery reds and golds rippling on the pond's surface held her attention so completely she almost didn't notice the shift beside her until she heard Daniel softly clear his throat. She turned. He was kneeling on one knee, steadying himself on the uneven grass. In his hand rested a small velvet box. For a moment everything stopped. The autumn air thickened with anticipation. Her heart beat so loud it echoed in her ears. Daniel looked up at her, his eyes full of a tenderness she never thought she would feel again, not after the pain of her first marriage. She remembered what it had felt like to trust, only to have that trust shattered. And here was this man, gentle, steady, kneeling before her not to impress, not to control, but to ask, to invite, to choose her. Then he opened the box. Inside, a delicate, beautiful ring sparkled in the amber light, a simple diamond, elegant and timeless. "Juliana," he began, voice trembling slightly, "I've watched you rise from heartbreak stronger, wiser, more compassionate than ever. I've seen how you pour your heart into helping others, how you fight for the women at your nonprofit, how you give without expecting anything in return. You've made me a better man. And I can't imagine facing anything, joy or hardship, without you beside me." He took a breath. "Will you marry me?" Warmth surged through her body, followed by a flood of tears she couldn't hold back. She thought of the last time she'd said yes to a proposal, a moment wrapped in illusions, which later unraveled into betrayal. But this felt nothing like that. This was clear-eyed. This was rooted in days and nights where love had shown itself quietly, in understanding, in listening, in simply being there. She no longer needed a fairy tale. She needed something true. And here it was. This was real. A man who had never sought to possess her, only to stand with her. A love forged in truth, not status. Her voice quivered with joy as she answered, "Yes, Daniel, of course I will." A gentle wave of applause rippled from nearby, strangers who had paused their walk to witness the scene. Juliana laughed through her tears, her heart full to bursting with relief, joy, and an almost dizzying hope for the future. Daniel slid the ring onto her finger. The band felt cool against her skin, a quiet, perfect symbol of everything she had reclaimed and everything they were building. When they rose, he pulled her close. His forehead rested against hers. "Thank you," he whispered, still in awe, "for trusting me." The words weren't grand, but they held everything. Juliana closed her eyes, inhaling the scent of fallen leaves and the soft, familiar spice of his cologne, and in that moment she knew, with unwavering certainty, this was home. She was choosing love again, this time with eyes wide open and a heart finally unburdened by the ghosts of her past. In the weeks following their engagement, a quiet contentment settled into Juliana's life. For so long, she had endured a whirlwind of betrayal, public humiliation, and the invasive glare of scandal. Her every move had once been shadowed by whispers of Adrian's deceit and drama. But now, with Adrian and his web of manipulation firmly behind her, Juliana discovered the peace that comes with building something real, something rooted in shared values and gentle affection. Each morning felt like a new page, a quiet beginning. News of her engagement to Daniel didn't make headlines. There were no flashing cameras, no gossip blogs speculating, and she was grateful for that. This time, it wasn't about spectacle. The word spread organically among friends, family, and her colleagues at the nonprofit. People who had seen her struggle, who had supported her through heartbreak and lawsuits, now rejoiced in her second chance at love. Her coworkers teased her about wedding dates and decorations, curious what kind of celebrations someone as grounded as Juliana might plan. She would simply smile and say she wanted a ceremony that reflected what truly mattered: love, service, and purpose. Her personal and professional worlds had begun to merge in a beautiful way. While Juliana coordinated emergency support for women leaving abusive relationships, Daniel was finalizing blueprints for a community center in an underserved part of the city. During their lunch breaks, they often volunteered together, serving food at a local soup kitchen or helping organize silent auctions for local causes. These were the moments that meant the most. Love, she had learned, wasn't about extravagant gestures. It was about mutual growth, shared compassion, and quiet, steady support. Of course, insecurities still visited her sometimes. She would recall how fully she had once trusted Adrian, only to be left broken. But each time a flicker of doubt surfaced, she grounded herself in Daniel's unwavering honesty, in his gentle way of always showing up. From running errands when she was overwhelmed, to lifting others with kindness she hadn't even asked for, he gave without needing to be asked. Instead of letting the past make her wary, she chose to see it as proof of her resilience. Friends traveled from across the country to visit Juliana in her cozy Brooklyn apartment. They remarked on the spark in her eyes, the genuine ease in her laughter. It no longer carried the weight of hidden pain. Freed from the long shadow of Adrian's control, she found joy in the simple things: cooking dinner with Daniel, late-night conversations about dreams and goals, imagining a life built with honesty at its core. Sometimes those conversations drifted toward the possibility of a family, an idea that once frightened her, now wrapped her in a sense of calm, knowing that this new chapter would be written with mutual respect and open-hearted trust. But perhaps the greatest transformation was how Juliana now shared her story, not as a warning, but as a testament. At a local women's shelter, she stood before a group of survivors, women who had faced their own battles, and told them the truth. That pain had nearly broken her, but it had also led her to a love so gentle, so sincere, it still took her breath away. As tears welled in their eyes, Juliana saw something she once thought she'd never find again: hope. Applause and warm embraces reassured Juliana that her story could offer hope to others who felt trapped, forgotten, or broken by betrayal. And in all these moments, big and small, Juliana found healing. Her happiness was no longer fleeting. It was deep, rooted in the knowledge that her worth had never depended on anyone else's approval. The woman who had once been left reeling from a millionaire's shallow promises now stood as an advocate for others, a devoted partner, and living proof that even life's most painful falls could lead to something radiant and real. On a bright spring afternoon, Juliana and Daniel exchanged vows in a modest, heartfelt ceremony in a newly restored city park. Strings of fairy lights glowed gently between trees, and guests sat on simple wooden chairs adorned with wildflowers. As Juliana walked down the aisle, her heart swelled. There was Daniel, waiting beneath an arch of greenery, tears shining in his eyes. Friends and family clapped and cheered as they sealed their promises with a kiss, a symbol of the life they had built together, quietly, steadily, beautifully. And in that moment, Juliana felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She had taken the pain that once threatened to break her and turned it into something brave, into love, purpose, and joy. At the edge of the crowd, partially hidden behind a tree, someone watched: Adrian, uninvited. He had come in a last-ditch effort to see what he had lost. He stood still, his face carved with regret, watching the woman he once thought he owned, now standing free, glowing with happiness in another man's arms. Juliana never even saw him. As the newlyweds turned to face their cheering guests, Adrian slipped away, vanishing into the crowd, carrying the crushing realization that he had destroyed the best thing that ever happened to him. And so, in the aftermath of betrayal, Juliana didn't just find justice, she found herself. She rebuilt her life with courage, compassion, and a quiet strength that could no longer be shaken. What began as a story of deceit became a journey of self-discovery and transformation. It reminded us that sometimes the chapters that bring us to our knees are the very ones that set us free. Through grace, honesty, and the unwavering support of someone who believed in her, Juliana created a life that was not only hers, but one worth celebrating. She no longer lived in anyone's shadow. She had stepped fully into the light. Dear friend, if you're standing in the wreckage of something that once felt unshakable, wondering how to move forward, please take heart. Life will not always be fair, and people will not always be kind. But as the Stoics remind us, we cannot control what happens to us, only how we respond. Juliana's journey reminds us that resilience is not born from perfection, but from choosing every day to rise, even with a broken heart. You are not defined by the pain you've endured, but by the grace with which you carry it and the strength with which you rebuild.